Hey, how's it going? I'm gonna keep last week's Halo theme going and talk about drop pods this week. You see orbital drop pods in sci-fi a lot. They're definitely one of the most amusing ways to go about getting futuristic military forces from space down onto the surface of a planet. They're a great answer to the question of what's the most dangerous mode of transportation we could possibly think of. But today's question is, do they actually make any sense? My first interaction with orbital drop pods as a concept, I've not seen them in real life, was with ODSTs from Halo, but drop pods are featured pretty prominently elsewhere too. Helldivers 2 comes to mind right now. Whenever you select a planet to deploy onto, you get to watch your little Helldiver squad get fired down from space. Oh, I know this is just a loading screen, but I'm so hyped right now! That said, in both Halo 3 ODST and Helldivers 2, visually, I don't think you actually see the deployment happening from orbit. The ships you launch from tend to just be hovering stationary over the surface of a planet. In case you were sleeping during physics class, an orbit is when you move fast enough to fall around a planet. I guess suborbital drop shock troopers just doesn't have the same ring to it. And I know lore-wise the ODSTs from Halo drop from orbit. It literally says it in the opening cutscene. I'm just saying, the one gameplay moment we actually see from a first-person perspective, a drop happening, you're clearly not actually in orbit because the big space elevator tower thing has no sideways velocity whatsoever, whereas in reality, in low orbit, you move about this fast. Similar deal for Helldivers, you can actually see your ship up in the sky, it's really not that far away. Then again, it looks pretty high up when you launch from it in the first place, so I don't know. There's other sci-fi examples that have orbital drop pods too. There's 40K, there's Starship Troopers, and a bunch of other ones I'm too stupid to think of right now. Regardless, what we want to know is if a station or a ship in orbit could fire out a pod and make it down to a planet specifically for the purpose of rapid military deployment. First off, what's even the point in having a drop pod? Why would you actually want to use this instead of just having a spaceship fly down to the surface? Well, the answer basically comes down to speed and combat effectiveness. You want troopers on the surface as quickly as possible. You want to minimize the number of your guys getting shot out of the sky. All other concerns secondary, including how you get your guys off the planet again. Okay, well, under those circumstances, yeah, just shoot the guys at the planet. That's a drop pod. If you're not planning on collecting and reusing these drop pods, which let's be honest, you're probably not, given you're essentially trying to get as close as possible to making a bullet you can put a person inside of, one notable design goal you could have would be to keep the pods as cheap as possible to manufacture, which means you're probably going to want to use ablative materials on the front of the pod. In normal person language, that means that the shielding on the front of the pod that gets hot as you enter the atmosphere basically just peels off and takes all the heat with it. There are fancy reusable tiles like the kind that NASA had on its space shuttle or the kind that SpaceX puts on the Starship, but those are pricier, very delicate, and complicated to maintain and replace. If you're catapulting a team of dudes from space into an active war zone in a vehicle with no means of reaching orbit again afterwards, I hate to break it to you, Chief, but I don't think you're getting the pod back whether you make the tiles reusable or not, so my vote would be to make the whole thing fully expendable. Something that always gets overlooked about drop pod design is how orbital mechanics works. If your mothership with the pods in it is in space and it wants to continue being in space, it needs to be in an orbit. Getting from one orbit to another takes a lot of energy, to the point where even having borderline magic, the Expanse level nuclear fusion drives doesn't make that a non-issue. But if you want to launch pods to a specific location, your ship needs to be in a specific location above that, which if you're in an orbit, most of the time it's not going to be there, so how do you square that circle? Alright, let's examine the pros and cons of each orbit we might choose. First off, if you're in a low Earth orbit, the point on the ground you're currently above is always changing, and it's always changing very quickly. You're orbiting the Earth in less than 2 hours. Now that's good because that's a lot of the Earth's surface that you can access within 2 hours of any moment. That's fairly short notice. But if your mothership with the drop pods in it is in an equatorial orbit, you'll only be able to deploy somewhere on or very near the Earth's equator. If you give your orbit some inclination, the map of the places on the surface you're passing over is going to look like there's a sine wave that swings back and forth between the northern and southern hemispheres. And also, that sine wave is not going to perfectly connect to itself because the Earth is rotating under you as you're orbiting around it. Now that's actually a good thing in the sense that it lets you reach more places on Earth as the Earth rotates. If you're not currently orbiting over a place that you want to drop down to, just give it a while. Sooner or later, you will pass over the place that you want to drop down to. Although this is annoying in the sense that the Earth is just going to take however long it takes to rotate, and you could be in not quite the right place in one orbit, and then in the next orbit you've overshot it, and you've got to wait like half a day until the Earth lines up again. Depending on how much you're able and willing to move the mothership, you might be stuck waiting for the Earth to align itself properly for several days. Now, if you want to be able to access literally anywhere, you can put your mothership into a polar orbit, which is going to let you drop pods anywhere on the Earth sooner or simulator, but you are still completely at the mercy of whatever the Earth's rotation is doing. The only way to have access to the entire planet via drop pods is to have a large enough military presence in orbit that you can permanently station potentially quite a lot of people up there and have all of them on standby. If you have enough people, and I do mean really quite a lot, you will at a certain point know for a fact that you can drop anywhere on Earth at any moment. But there are ways to optimize that. For example, if there's one particular area of the Earth that you're interested in, you could maybe do something more akin to a Molniya orbit, which loiters over one hemisphere of the Earth as long as possible and then flings itself around the backside of the planet as quickly as possible. Something like that could cut the need for hundreds of motherships down to something like only 3 or 4 of them. Now, there is a way to circumvent the need for all the fiddling around with orbital mechanics, and that's to just launch your drop pods out of a mothership which is floating stationary above the planet, right? You could just commit to that being the thing that you're doing. Your mothership starts at a lower altitude, meaning the drop pods get to the surface way quicker, which is also advantageous. Although this causes other problems, chief of which is the frankly insane amount of energy it takes to make something weighing thousands of tons just float in the air. Most sci-fi universes handwave away that kind of stuff with anti-gravity levitation or something that there's just no actually evidence-based reason to think exists in our reality. Oh, but Sam, it might be possible. Who are you to say? Yeah, it might be, but there's no reason for us to presume that it will be a thing if we don't know whether or not it's a thing. So we're best to assume that the laws of physics are unlikely to allow us to build something that breaks our current understanding of the laws of physics. More realistically, I mean, you could do something like this, but it would just need an absolute gigachat of a drive system. Still though, that's a big waste of energy and it might not work as well as you'd like it to anyway. Having something hover would make it a pretty easy target. Just ask the F-15 that shot down a satellite in low Earth orbit in 1985. So if you're dropping your guys from a stationary platform in low Earth orbit or even lower, you're making your enemy's job very easy for them, particularly if you assume they have a similar tech level to you. A good way to split the difference might be to do something like the Arcbird from Ace Combat. You know, big spacecraft with wings, drops down from orbit into the upper atmosphere, in this case, fires some pods towards the ground before burning its engines and ascending back into space again. Now I'm kind of glossing over that and making that seem a lot easier than it would be, because at the lowest altitude point this would be a hypersonic atmospheric vehicle, which is not a phrase that is synonymous with something that's easy to build. Assuming you go with the mothership that launches the pods from orbit, which is the version of this idea we tend to think of, in terms of actually getting from A to B, you obviously want to get a space pod down to the surface of a planet as quickly as possible, and I assume the pod will get launched from the mothership with a small solid rocket booster. Not sure if that's a dumb assumption or not, but I don't think you'd need anything more complicated than that. Now, naively, you might assume that you just point the pod at the planet and shoot it at the planet. But if you're orbiting a planet, you have a huge amount of sideways velocity. Pointing the pod down and turning the engines on is going to add a comparatively small amount of downwards velocity onto the already gigantic amount of sideways velocity you have. The net result is probably going to be you missing the planet completely and putting yourself onto an incredibly inconvenient orbit with no fuel left to do anything about it. So what you'd actually want to do is burn the pod engines retrograde, which means backwards against the direction that you're orbiting in. That will cause your orbital trajectory to decay until it intersects with the atmosphere. This is definitely the fastest and most efficient way of doing things, which is why this is how space agencies deorbit spacecraft in real life, as opposed to taking the approach you tend to see in sci-fi, which is me see object, me want go object, me turn on engine and point at object. Speaking of unusual things that have caused me to make excited ape-like noises, a few weeks ago I received a transmission to one of my Xandros satellites. I assumed it was the guys in Epsilon Eridani towing my truck again, but apparently it was a sponsorship offer. I've actually had 1 or 2 sponsorship offers before, but I wanted to wait until I got one which really ticked all the boxes, so I'm happy to say this video is sponsored by Brilliant, which means I'm basically an official YouTuber now. Yeah, baby! So in case you've been living under a rock and you've never heard of this before, Brilliant is an amazing service that helps you learn, except it's designed to be actually engaging in a way that rubbing your face against a textbook is generally not. And the great thing about Brilliant is it kind of gamifies learning to give you the dopamine hits that you normally get from wasting your time, except when you're using Brilliant, you're actually getting smarter. By using Brilliant, you'll earn experience like you do in a video game, and you get immediate feedback on your work, which is really helpful for actually retaining information. Brilliant helps you become a better thinker and problem solver with thousands of visual, interactive lessons in mathematics, science, programming, data analysis, and artificial intelligence. It's got a really good mixture of engaging problems with competitive features, and it keeps a note of your daily streak to keep you motivated. Brilliant has science courses which can help you develop your scientific intuition through interactive visual problem solving. You can learn to think like an engineer with lessons on electrical and digital circuits, gear systems, or physical structures. And I just love that it comes as an app because it makes it easy to learn anywhere. You've got it in your pocket wherever you go. So it means if your daily commute involves sitting on a train or waiting for a bus, you can use that time to exercise your brain rather than rotting it out mindlessly scrolling YouTube shorts like you statistically probably do, if we're being honest. If that sounds cool, get involved and let them know who sent you by going to brilliant.org/Xandros or using your phone to scan the QR code on screen, or just go ahead and click the link in the description. If you use my link or you scan the QR code, you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited access to everything on Brilliant. So use my link, check them out, or I'm going to come over to your house and do this. What was I saying? Oh yeah, space pods. So the main thing that's always stood out to me as a problem for orbital drop pods is the G-forces involved in smashing into the floor. Now, smashing into the floor is a nuanced issue. Is it not an orbital drop pod if you don't slam it into the floor? You could make a capsule, put your elite super soldiers in it, deorbit it and land it slowly on parachutes or whatever. But I don't know, man. Imagine being a Lockheed engineer working on an orbital drop pod and your engineer friends at Boeing find out you've put parachutes on it. That'd be fucking embarrassing. You're trying to get the whole thing down as quickly as possible, right? So do you want to be an easy floating target in the middle of the sky, or do you want to be a bullet screaming towards the floor? Listen, one way or another you are going to inevitably slow down, and I don't just mean slamming into the floor. I mean that going through the atmosphere is going to slow you down a lot given that you start at orbital velocity. Or, well, all of this is assuming that you're landing on a planet with Earth-like atmosphere. If not, then that's a whole other tangent. Anyway, pretty sure your average modern space capsule entering the atmosphere and falling without any drogue chutes or anything will end up slamming into the ground at a couple of 100 miles per hour after that orbital speed bleeds off. Call it 100 meters per second to give it a nice round number. The actual exact speed will depend on the shape and mass of the capsule that we're talking about. Regardless, if you don't do anything to stop yourself, then the speed is definitely going to kill you when you pancake into the floor, but you could do a side burn. In fact, that's almost certainly going to be the happy medium between hard pounding into the floor and getting shot out of the sky. In case you don't know, a side burn is a real rocket maneuver. It's when you're falling from the sky and you ignite your engines at the last possible instant and blast them so that you perfectly touch down just as your vertical speed reaches 0 meters per second. It's very fast and very efficient. The only problem is that there is zero margin for error, so if your engine takes an extra 1/10 of a second to start up properly, you are gonna become a smouldering crater in the floor, surrounded by limbs. Now, most science fiction media with drop pods do show some kind of thruster slowing the pod down at the last minute and or deploying some kind of air brake as it falls through the atmosphere. It's just that most media also shows the pod slamming into the floor really hard anyway. You'd definitely be crapping out your spine if you did that in real life. In fact, if you did this for real, I imagine you'd want to be hitting the ground at no more than a couple of meters per second so you don't break your legs, because that is going to seriously affect your immediate combat effectiveness. You want to be able to rush out of the door shooting at the enemy, so ideally you want to minimize the G-forces that you experience on the way down so that you don't faint the second you try and stand up. So ideally we don't want to completely max out a human's ability to withstand G-forces. Now I know there's a lot to balance here, but honestly I think this is quite doable. Assuming you're dropping at 100 meters per second for the last few kilometers, if your super soldier can take 2 or 3 Gs of continuous acceleration for a few seconds, you'd only need to activate your thrusters for like 5 or 10 continuous seconds, which really isn't that long. So the deceleration phase seems weirdly plausible, actually. When I first thought about this, I thought that might be a bigger issue, but no, I think it might actually be fine. Oddly enough, I think the biggest problem with the whole idea of an orbital drop pod is the problem that you're going to have with how visible they are. Like, sure, you're dropping in hot from space, but not hot enough to evade the kind of weapons your opponents are likely to have in a scenario like this. And for those last 10 or 20 kilometers when you're deep in the atmosphere, you're not going to be moving that fast, so you're going to be pretty vulnerable. Any kind of system with an infrared detector is going to be able to see you from the far side of absolutely wherever. So maybe the best use case for drop pods is actually when your enemy has already had their missile and laser systems destroyed. Or maybe you're just dropping onto a planet of people that haven't reached the Stone Age yet. I don't know, who am I to judge? So, are orbital drop pods plausible? Yeah, kinda. And that's the kind of detailed conclusion you visit this channel for. As always, thanks to my elite level supporters, Thunderbolt22A10, who has orbit-capable transport in his living room, but he uses it as a coffee table. Nomad Greg, who travels the cosmos in search of golden doubloons. Andrew Maul, who's a timeless being who created the Grand Canyon when he sneezed one time. John Bejarano, who performed a tactical orbital insertion into your mum's house last night. JDK, who built an invisible time machine and forgot where he put it. Mutantious Doom, whose house is stuck in geostationary orbit. Stormester Ridder, who invented alphabetti spaghetti in an attempt to hasten the entropic death of the universe. And thanks to all my other supporters too. Don't forget to join the Patreon or the channel membership if you want to be featured in my video credits or chat on Discord. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.